Will Short perform the roll call. Will.
Thanks, Chair. Chair Redman. Present. Councillor Craig. Councillor Deutschman. Here. Councillor Erb. Here. Councillor Foxton.
Present.
Councillor Harris.
Present.
Councillor Hewenick.
Present.
Councillor James.
Present.
Councillor Liggett. Councillor McCabe. Councillor Nowak. Councillor Solonen.
Present.
Councillor Shantz. Councillor Verbanovic.
Roll called and accounted for.
Councillor Williams.
Here.
And then Councillor Wolf.
Here.
Thank you, Chair.
And I'm present as well.
Thank you, Jen. I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gathered today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of our Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements, and their contributions to our community. We now have a motion to reconvene into open session moved by Councillor Hewenick and Councillor Nowak, or seconded by Councillor Nowak. Please use your yes or no button in the e-scribe to vote, please. Maybe just we'll do the raise a hand thing, or raise your hands. That's carried. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we will now proceed with the delegations as listed on the agenda. Delegations will be heard today, but no decisions will be made. I would like to remind all delegations of some guidelines for participation. For those that are participating virtually today, please leave your video camera turned off and your microphone audio muted until you are called upon to speak. We also ask that you leave the meeting once your issue has been addressed. You are then welcome to watch the remainder of the meeting being broadcast live via YouTube and the regional website. For those who are joining us in person, please proceed to the podium when you are called upon to speak. Today's delegations will be allotted 5 minutes to speak. Any delegations who registered after the deadline will be allocated 3 minutes to speak. A reminder, if you are watching the webcast of this meeting and would like to address the community at the end of the registered delegations, you can contact Regional Clerk at regionofwaterloo.ca during the meeting to obtain the link. One last reminder for delegations, please do not take offense if following your presentations there are no questions from council. This is the council's time to really listen and reflect upon those opinions and ideas shared with us by our community members. I would like to call upon now Don Bourgeois to address council. Don.
Thank you. Arthur Dent is blocking Municipal Council from demolishing his house for a bypass, complaining that he did not know about the planning decision to do so. Arthur is then rescued by Ford Prefect just before the Volgon construction fleet destroys earth to clear the way for a hyperspace bypass. And the Volgon commander comments that it is no excuse that Earthlings did not know because nobody checked the planning office in Alpha Centauri, which of course is only a few light years away from Earth. I do not say that the region has acted like the Volgons with respect to the Waterloo Regional International Airport. I did check the master planning document in 2017 and the planning documents in 2019, and did not object to the long-term plan for the airport. My bad. I missed the impact on the community that I live in particular the noise exposure projections that didn't cover areas of the city of Kitchener and various other areas. The review was very narrow in scope. It certainly did not cover the noise and disruption in the Dune South area. I now know that there is substantial noise levels and disruption from flare jets. Noise and disruption levels I would not have predicted, and certainly did not see from WestJets, that planes that flew over for the last 20 years, 15 years, something like that. But I understand that they fly a different flight pattern. Many flare jets fly directly over my backyard. WestJets do not. By directly over my backyard, I mean that literally. I can sit in the summertime and in my backyard and look up and see the green from the bottom of the WestJet, or from the flare. And I can hear them both inside and outside the house. Indeed, in September, I was in Winnipeg and at the airport, and walking from the airport to the airport hotel, it struck me that the noise that I was hearing at that distance across the parking lot was as loud as I had heard a few days before sitting in my backyard. Having said all that, I realize that the region has invested much money into the airport, and I clearly missed the impact of that investment on the quiet enjoyment of property. So I do not come to bury the airport or Flare, although Flare seems to be doing that on its own. Why am I here? Largely, in my view, because of a failure of governance or policy implementation. The region's investment is huge and may be at risk. I asked management at the airport on August 15th about what studies have been done on the impact of noise. No response. I followed up a month later and got a response, but not one that I found satisfactory. Given the amount of money that the region has invested, I urge Council to allocate appropriate funds in the 2023 budget to carry out appropriate noise and related studies to measure the noise and other negative impacts of flare and other airlines, or an increase in the number of flights on the Dune South and other areas that were not properly taken into account as part of the 2017 master plan or the 2019 planning document. Secondly, to engage with the community with respect to measures to mitigate the noise and other disruption. And quite frankly, to identify what type of warnings and other measures should be given to warn new purchasers that the noise from the airport will have negative impacts on their quiet enjoyment of their property. Similar, of course, to what you see in the GTA arising from Pearson. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Deutschman.
Sorry, I misunderstood Councillor Harris. I didn't think there were questions.
No, just thanks for coming in. Thank you, Councillor Harris. So are you suggesting that when you bought, there was a certain noise level that was in your purchase documents or whatever, or something somewhere, and you're suggesting that the noise level decibels are different now than they were back then?
Well, noise levels are clearly different, and I'm so old and decrepit that the documents that I had when I purchased back in 1995 would not have any noise level things in them. I'm suggesting now, for people who are purchasing in the Dune South area, which is a growth area, that is one of the things that should be considered. I'm not an expert. I'm an old retired guy. My degree was in history, not aviation, engineering, et cetera. And I don't mean to be flippant about it. It's not my expertise. But I think people should be aware before they purchase the biggest purchase they're going to do that this is going to happen.
Yeah, it's not my expertise either, and that's why I was asking the questions. And you started out with the Galaxy stuff, so I thought maybe you had a special interest in this issue. But
I just like to sleep in the afternoon on a summer day.
Yeah, we get calls often about that sort of thing. So you've piqued my interest on that. So something to think about in terms of monitoring decibel levels as we're expanding the airport and other services there. So thanks for coming in and raising the issue.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I'll call now on Jeff Bardwell, co-chair of the Drug Action Team. Jeff, you've got 5 minutes.
Depends when he bought it, might not have bought it.
Just press that. Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm a recent transplant here from Vancouver, moved in September. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Public Health Sciences and a research scientist at the BC Centre on Substance Use. I'm presenting today on behalf of my colleagues at the Drug Action Team, some of which are here in the audience. We're a collaboration of local policy experts, practitioners, and research and academics. So what I'm presenting today is thinking about de facto decriminalization as a cost-saving measure when we're talking about the budget. And I have some financial disclosures. My research is funded by the Research of Waterloo Public Health and Emergency Services, Health Canada, BC Ministry of Health, Vancouver Foundation, and First Nations Health Authority. So we know Waterloo Region is experiencing a drug poisoning crisis of epic proportions. We also know that there's a need for a coordinated response at the municipal level. Thinking about the community safety and well-being plan, something that's legislated to address overdose, addiction, crime, and victimization. So where do we go from here? We know that scientific evidence demonstrates a variety of negative impacts associated with drug criminalization. And so what I'm here to talk to you about today is a de facto decriminalization as a policy option that will save lives among citizens of Waterloo Region, as well as money. This is a budget issue. So when we look at the background, there's a lot of local support for decriminalization. We see in July 2020, following the heels of the Canadian Association of Chief of Police having unanimous support for the decriminalization of the personal possession of drugs, then Chief of Police Brian Larkin comes out in support of this. Then we see in December 2021, Regional Chair Karen Redmond, vocal support of decriminalization. March 2022, the Crime Prevention Council presents a variety of policy options to address criminalization, one being the decriminalization of the personal possession of drugs. And then finally, we see the last Regional Council in May 2022 endorsing decriminalization and sending letters to both federal and provincial counterparts. There's a variety of financial costs associated with criminalization. When we look at StatsCan data, we see that Waterloo Region is ranked the 6th highest rate of opioid-related offenses nationally. On the chart here, that's 30 offenses per 100,000 individuals compared to the national average, which is only 14. So that's more than double the national average. So clearly there's a lot of money going into the criminalization of possession. Majority of these offenses, according to the data, are possession-related. And these are costs related to policing, processing, courts, and incarceration. There was a recent study released by the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addictions that looked at systems-level costs over a 10-year period and found that the criminal justice costs for substance use in Canada alone account for $9.2 billion annually. So clearly, this is a budget issue. De facto decriminalization, what is this? So this doesn't require a Section 56 exemption from the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. It would be a directive from the Chief of Police to not arrest people for simple possession of illegal drugs and to not confiscate their drugs. There's some examples, some in Canada and some internationally. So if we look at the Vancouver Police Department in 2006, they released what's called a deprioritization policy, which limits the enforcement of simple possession citywide. Toronto Police in 2017 created
1 minute.
We're done?
No, 1 minute, sorry.
Okay, 1 minute. Okay, Toronto Police created non-enforcement zones around their consumption and treatment services. And then finally, we see things internationally in Copenhagen, similar non-enforcement zones created in communities where people are dealing with a lot of substance use issues. So in conclusion, clearly bold action is needed to address this poisoning crisis affecting our communities. There's already strong support locally for decriminalization, so de facto criminalization is actually a policy option that's available immediately, and this would lead to improvements in social, health, and economic improvements across the region. There's obviously a high amount of police time and resources dedicated to drug possession. I'm well aware that council can't direct police operations, but it does approve the budgets. And since so many people are on board with decriminalization, it seems if we're looking for places to make cuts, this is an obvious policy choice. And ultimately, this is going to be cost-saving and also life-saving, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Jeff. I just want to remind council, because it is a public input sessions, that we're going to limit, obviously, any questions to clarifications only in order to be respectful for the people that have signed up as delegations tonight to carry forward. So thank you, Jeff, for your time.
Thank you.
I guess I have Councillor Craig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, I do appreciate your presentation. I wish we had a lot more time to hear a lot more from you. My question is, so we decriminalize simple possession. What am I going to see in a year's time in terms of the decrease in the number of overdose deaths?
So that's a great question. If I had a crystal ball, it would be, I'd probably have more information for you. If we look to other models like Portugal that decriminalized drugs in the 90s, they saw a decrease in overdose, increased access to health services, et cetera. And I'm happy to share more documents with regional council. I did send a letter in December, and I understand it was likely around holiday time, but I'm happy to put together a policy brief or more literature in the area to talk about really what this would look like and what it could lead to.
As I see it, Mr. Chair, through you, last thing, this is only one very small part of an overall problem. And I certainly would like to hear more from you and other delegations on this in the future.
Absolutely. I think there's no drug policy that's a silver bullet to solving issues impacting our community, and I'm happy to be a part of those conversations. So thank you.
Councillor McCabe.
Through you, Chair Harris, and thank you for the presentation. And I'm sure there's lots more that you could be sharing with us. And thank you for the work that you're doing on this really important issue. I'm curious, because one of your slides said that this could be done by a directive of the Chief of Police. So is this a conversation that you're having with the Chief of Police, or where is that in your advocacy and work?
So I've sent a letter to the board, and I have not received a response yet. Again, it was sent December 15th, so maybe people are on holidays, but that will be part of the process, absolutely. I wanted to bring it here. It's obviously a budget issue. There's other issues too, and I'm happy to explore that. Again, I'm quite new here. I'm trying to figure out who the players are, who I need to be in contact with. I'm meeting some of you tonight. That's great. But yeah, no, I haven't had those conversations yet, but I'm happy to.
Okay, yeah, and sorry, that wasn't to imply that we didn't want you to be talking to us at all. I was just, I'm just curious if that is, he's been recently installed, but, and I don't obviously know what his policy is in terms of meeting on issues like this, but if it just feels like if that's the person who can actually make that type of decision, then it's great for us to learn about this, and obviously disturbing to hear about that we have the opioid death is twice as high, rates are twice as high here as they are in other communities. So thank you very much for taking time to come in and talk about this.
Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
Just a point of clarification, and thank you very much for your, thank you very much for your presentation. I fully agree. I think that it would be cost savings. But for the simple possession, would that be like the provincial or federal regulations of how much you're allowed to have on your person? Or would that change if you got it to talk to the, yeah.
So that would ultimately be up to the police chief to decide with communities. So what's happening in British Columbia, where much of my research has taken place historically, is a threshold was decided, and some of this was based on police data around drug confiscations, some was based on limited research, but I will say that in developing this policy, it's important to not just talk to people within the city center, but also people in more regional or more rural settings, because there might be different trends within rural settings compared to the larger urban settings. So.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Huenick.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Through you, Chair. I heard that it would be cost saving, and I heard that it would be time saving, and I understand those pieces. Could you speak to a little bit more? I think you made the claim that it's also a life-saving measure. Could you speak to how that works?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of research looking at the impacts of criminalization on people who use drugs internationally. And I'm happy to share some of that with you. Some examples point to people reluctance in accessing health services, and that might have something to do with traveling to a health service when you are in possession of illicit drugs. Other research points to people hiding their use. So things that are criminalized, there's a lot of stigma associated with that. And we know that majority of people who would die from an overdose death do so alone because they're not with anyone. And so really, there definitely are life-saving components to this. And I didn't want to come here and say that this is all about saving money, but that is a component of this, and this is why I'm presenting it at a budget meeting. So, but thank you for your question.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Deutschman.
Thank you, Mr. Harris, Chair Harris. Jeff, thanks for your presentation. And I did get the letter that you did send out, and I thought it was very informative. So the example you cited, though, was something in Vancouver a while ago. Are they continuing with that policy? Because it was like a 06, I think, date on that, for example.
So yes and no. And so one thing that I should clarify around de facto decriminalization, the difference between de facto decriminalization and getting a Section 56 exemption is a de facto decriminalization policy, officers can still use discretion. So in theory, officers could still arrest someone and charge them for possession. It's not the priority, but it does happen. With a Section 56 exemption, that's not the case. So those would be the two differences. And but I think that this is something that could be explored immediately rather than waiting on the feds who have said that they're not going to budge until they see what happens in BC.
Are there any studies or research on the de facto approach versus the exemption?
Yes and no. It's quite limited, to be honest. I think there's been recent literature looking at, has the Vancouver policy actually come into practice? Because someone did a Freedom of Information request to the Vancouver Police Department and found, they said that they weren't charging anyone for simple possession, but actually they were. They might have been charges attached to other charges, as well as confiscating drugs. But no, I think there's a lack of understanding there. And I think also locally, I'm not sure what data is available. I do know that charges for simple possession in Waterloo region amount to about 1 per day. And that's just charges. So that's not arresting someone and not charging them or confiscating drugs. This is just clearly charges.
In your chart talks about I think the chart was about the number of deaths from opioid deaths, or?
So that was the first slide, but the second one, which was talking about double the national average,
Right.
that was about opioid-related offenses.
Oh, offenses,
So the
okay.
national average is 14 per 100,000 versus 30 per 100,000, which is Waterloo
Okay,
region.
so what you're suggesting is if we reduce the number of arrests in this area, it would reduce police time, police costs in dealing with this area, and ultimately, how are the Crowns generally dealing with these sorts of charges?
Yeah, and good question. Happy to continue this conversation. I don't have the answers to everything, but I will say I'm happy to explore this, and I'm so thankful for this opportunity to present this as my first.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. I'd like to call in now on Eden Kubasek of Kitchener. Eden, you have 5 minutes.
I've already timed this, so the 1-minute warning won't be necessary unless you feel it's necessary. Hi, my name is E. Philip Kubasek, and I've been a resident of the Waterloo region all my life. My proposal will help all the residents of the Waterloo region who are feeling it financially because of things like skyrocketing inflation and skyrocketing interest rates. There's expected to be a 4.8% property tax increase in Kitchener, and with a property tax increase, there will be a corresponding rent increase. To counter the 4.8% property tax increase in Kitchener, which will also save all the residents of the Waterloo region money, I would like to ask you, the regional councils, to defund the police an equivalent of the 4.8% property tax increase, so there is no property tax increase. This is not defunding. People have asked for it many times before all over Ontario, and then spending the money on other things. This is a defunding of the police to save property taxpayers and the renters of the Waterloo region money, not to spend it on something else. This defunding of the police will not make any difference, and the police are currently overstaffed. I will provide you with some proof regarding the latter. The firefighters, private sector, and the paramedics get the job done with half the number of people the police use. My own property on King Street in Kitchener, which I currently live on the top 2 floors above the first floor businesses, has had many break-ins to the businesses on the first floor over the last 30 years. When the business owners report it to the police always say, "There's nothing we can do. We will never catch the people who broke in." There have been many break-ins into cars in the parking lot, including 2 of my vehicles and the thefts of the license plates off my car. And when reported to the police say there's nothing we can do. There have been many thefts on the property outside over the last 30 years, including the theft of a motorcycle, thefts right at the front facing King Street, and even 4 thefts in a 1-month period. When reported to the police, they say they can't do anything about it. In the case of the 4 thefts in a 1-month period, I was forced to do the police's job and catch the guy myself to stop the thefts. Residents in the Waterloo region's wages have not kept up with skyrocketing inflation, and they can't afford the currently unnecessary excessive police budget. In Canada, we spend about 1/3 of our property taxes to pay for the police budget. It's not cheap to hire police officers. A lot of police officers make $100,000 per year at the taxpayer's expense, plus healthcare benefits and a pension for life. A previous Cambridge mayor said on CKCO TV News that at a police budget meeting, he felt intimidated by the chief of police pushing spending on the police budget. With the police always pushing for more spending on the police budget, it has led to the current needless excessive spending. If you allow the residents of the Waterloo region a free vote, most people would vote for my proposed 4.8% defunding of the police, so there is no property tax increase. I've contacted the Waterloo Region Record and CKCO TV to let them know that I will give the Waterloo Regional Councils a solution so that there does not have to be a 4.8% property tax increase and a corresponding rent increase. I am a mechanical engineer, and if needed, I will do the calculations and not charge any consulting fees to determine how much defunding of the police is required, so there is no property tax increase.
Great. Thank you, Eden, for your time. Appreciate it coming in. I'd like to call now on Michael Doroshenko of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, region of Waterloo, Wellington. Michael, you've got 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's also my first time presenting to the Honorable Council. Thank you for having me here. I'm Michael Doroshenko, representing the Ukrainian Canadian Congress in the region of Waterloo. We are a relatively new organization, and we represent the interests of Ukrainians and Ukrainian Canadians in the region of Waterloo and Wellington County. So, first of all, I'd like to thank the regional councillors in the region of Waterloo for providing funding in 2022 to a variety of different projects to help Ukrainian newcomers settle in the region of Waterloo through the Waterloo Region Immigration Partnership and various other initiatives. However, I would like to remind everyone that the war in Ukraine goes on. Just last week, yet another residential building in the city of Dnipro in Ukraine was destroyed by a Russian missile, and dozens of civilians were killed, including children. And so every week brings something horrible again and again. And so the reason I mention it is because in 2022, hundreds of Ukrainians fleeing this horrible war came to the region of Waterloo, and this trend will continue because the war continues in 2023. So the reason I'm here at the budget meeting is to ask the region of Waterloo to do more in 2023. For example, I'd like to provide an example from another municipal government, the Durham region, which is above Toronto. In 2022, allocated about $1 million to support some rental programs for the Ukrainian newcomers. And that was quite successful based on my conversations with Ukrainian stakeholders in the Durham region. And I did send a document related to that program from that region to the regional clerk, so I think it will be available to all of you at your request. And so the reason I'm bringing it to you, I think the Waterloo region should follow suit in 2023 and take the good lessons from all around Canada. And like I said, a lot of projects already were done in 2022, but those projects were mostly volunteer-based, and people are burning out. People have their own jobs and children and everything. So I think it's time to, hire someone and pay someone to maybe administer this program if it gets implemented through the regional government. So that, all volunteers are great, and I myself am a volunteer. However, we do need some structure. We do need some support from the region, and that can be done either directly or through one of the established agencies which have lots of experience helping newcomers, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the end of my presentations, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Verbanovic.
Thanks, and thank you very much, Michael, for coming in today and the work that I know you and others are doing to support Ukrainians who are coming to our community. I'm just wondering, do you have a sense notionally in terms of the number of Ukrainians that are coming to Canada and Ontario specifically? Is this region sort of seeing their proportionate share, or are issues such as housing and so on creating some challenges in terms of people locating here?
Yes, thank you. Great question. So precise numbers I don't have, but we know that, tens of thousands of Ukrainians came in 2022 alone to Canada. As for this region, the best estimate I heard specifically for the region of Waterloo was about 1,500 or something like that who came just in 2022. Again, those numbers, I don't know the methodology behind them. This region is maybe not as popular as Toronto or Vancouver because obviously everybody flocks to those urban centers. However, it is still vastly more popular than, for instance, some other provinces in the west of Canada because it's still relatively close to Toronto, and we know the housing crunch is pretty crazy here, even without the war in Ukraine. And so when people come here, they try to rent an apartment, they don't have credit history, they don't have, references. It's an extremely difficult ordeal for them to break this vicious cycle. If they cannot find a house, they cannot find a job. If they cannot find a job, they cannot find a house. So this has been really challenging for us as volunteers and for all the Ukrainian newcomers who came in 2022.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Deutschman.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Michael, thank you very much for coming in today. My father was born in the Ukraine, 1936, at a time when they called that the Bloodlands. When another Russian dictator was starving out millions of Ukrainians. His grandmother starved. He made it to Canada and was successful, met my mom here. They lived a good life, lived the Canadian dream, had some supports. My heart is sad and heavy when I think about what's happening in the Ukraine. I would like us just to probably let you know what do we do to support refugees in Waterloo region, and perhaps we can provide that information so at least you know, and if there's opportunities for us to do more, I hope we will. I can't say how sad I am about all of this. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you for your words.
Thank you, Michael. I'd like to now call on Josh Orita and Emily Slovstra to speak from Cycle Waterloo Region. They'll be speaking virtually, and you have 5 minutes to speak. Josh and Emily, good evening. Welcome.
Good evening, Council. Are you able to hear us okay?
Hear you loud and clear.
Just share my slides here, share my screen. Okay, so as you said, good evening.
The president of Cycle WR.
And I'm Emily, the vice president.
Cycle WR was founded in 2018 and incorporated as a nonprofit in 2021. We advocate for cycling in Waterloo region to be a safe, convenient, and everyday mode of transportation for people of all ages and abilities. Cycling in Waterloo region has become noticeably better in recent years, with more separated bike lanes, protected bike lanes, and multi-use trails than ever before. These facilities enable safe, convenient access to roads that were previously dangerous to ride, and users benefit from snow clearing for access throughout the year. COVID-19 had an impact on commuting numbers. As commuting numbers improved throughout the region, we are hopeful that the newly installed traffic counters will reveal better overall use of active transportation facilities. However, safety is still a concern around the region. More than 8 pedestrians and cyclists were hit by drivers from November to December last year, including 1 fatality and others leading to hospitalizations. So we must continuously work to improve the safety of new and existing infrastructure.
We know that there are so many competing economic and social priorities for the coming council term. However, active transportation is a strategic priority for the region, with a focus on growth initiatives and creating over 200 kilometers of cycling and trail connections. The map on the left here identifies cycling facilities that are all ages and abilities in Kitchener-Waterloo, which pales in comparison to the motor vehicle network on the right. Last year, we loved riding the Newmarket Trail, and this year we're particularly excited for key connecting routes, including King Street and Coronation Boulevard in Cambridge, Weber Street in Waterloo, and the Bridgeport and Erb protected lanes becoming permanent in Waterloo, Victoria Street, Ferry Road, Lancaster, and Bleams in Kitchener, and we're also looking forward to seeing more cycling facilities and trails in the townships in the coming years. However, a lot of work is still ahead of us to address these network gaps in disconnected communities, and we're excited for these current and future projects that will address these challenges and build a more cohesive network. These projects also have the added benefit of helping to mitigate the impacts of climate change.
In 2019, the region declared a climate emergency, and in 2021, Council approved the Transform WR report by Climate Action WR. We know that climate change is a concern for Council, which is one of the primary reasons to invest in active transportation. 49% of regional emissions are in the transportation sector, and with a growing population, our roads cannot support significantly higher volumes of motor vehicle traffic. Active transportation options are a must for a growing metropolis.
So for the 2023 budget, we have 3 asks. First, we're impressed by the progress the region has made for active transportation, and we ask that Council ensures that momentum continues as set in the region's plan, which includes continued support for the 10-year capital program to build over 200 kilometers of active transportation connections, and continued support for active transportation growth initiatives, such as the micro-mobility pilot and updated infrastructure guide. This work is critical for closing gaps and building a safe, convenient cycling grid across the region that will reduce motor vehicle trips over time.
We strongly believe the region needs to accelerate active transportation and climate change initiatives. Our second ask is that Council support Councillor McCabe's requests, which includes amending the active transportation policy so cycling infrastructure improvements can be completed independent of road projects, decoupling the active transportation budget from the roadworks capital budget, and to prioritize funding connected to climate change initiatives and goals in the budget and in the strategic plan.
And lastly, we ask that Council support the proposal by Councillors McCabe and Deutschman to provide children under 12 with free access to transit. We strongly support expanding free access to transit, which would encourage more families to use GRT and for young riders to develop a habit of using non-motor vehicle options to travel across Waterloo region. This goes hand in hand with cycling and active transportation access.
We appreciate the impact the pandemic has had on the budget and high priority issues Council must deal with. This is why we ask Council to not diminish spending on important issues such as homelessness, mental health support, equity, and reconciliation. Instead, resources should be allocated from within the transportation budget to expand active transportation and climate change initiatives.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak to Council about the budget this evening. We look forward to engaging with you throughout your Council term, and we're always happy to answer any questions you might have about cycling and active transportation.
Thank you, Josh and Emily, for your presentation. If there's no questions, I'll move on to Brooklyn Wallace of Kitchener. Brooklyn, I believe, is here, and you have 5 minutes to speak.
Good evening. Oh, just got to pull up my actual notes. Okay. Good evening, Chair, Council, and regional staff. I fully support everything that Josh and Emily said there, as well as any police budget comments tonight. Our police budget last year was larger than the entire non-business budget of the city of Kitchener, which I find ridiculous. Our methods of transportation need a major revamp. I don't want to dwell on that subject. But I want to recognize that Dublin is adding 60 kilometers of protected cycling lanes this year. Montreal is adding over 200 kilometers over the next 4 years. And Edmonton is adding over 408 kilometers over the next 4 years as well. Next 3 years, actually. Radical changes like what we've seen in Paris, France, over the last 2 years is totally possible to have here. What I want to speak about is our transit system. It's been awful through the last few years, and in my experience, it's been getting worse. While I was running in the city election last October, I spent a lot of time canvassing, and I heard many people blame the LRT. I know that's not the actual issue. The LRT doesn't make buses late. It doesn't reduce the amount of bus drivers that we have, and it doesn't make it more likely for a scheduled bus to show up at all. Nor does it decrease or increase the super fun case of two buses of the same route showing up at the same time, both of them late. Those are caused by improper budgets and busy roads filled with people that could be taking public transit, or maybe even would be if it weren't so slow and consistently late. Not acceptable level of service for a region that claims to want to hit 50 by 30 and 80 by 50. But that's actually not the major thing I want to talk about. I'm actually here to propose a new project that I believe that the region should be taking on. This is based on the work of Emeryville, California, who over the last 7 months, or the course of 7 months last year, installed what's called a semi-seat, which is just a small metal two-faced seat bench at every bus stop in the city. I think the reason for this change is obvious. Seniors and disabled folk who can't easily stand and wait for the bus still need to take the bus. It also points out, or I'll also point out that studies show that nicer bus stops and nicer walks to the bus actually increase transit uptake and usage. In light of this, I reached out to the GRT to get an idea of how far we have to go. They said that out of 2,600 bus stops, we have 600 shelters, a handful of those shelters without benches, and over 2 of them have benches with no shelters. That means 1,800 of our stops are forcing people who have trouble standing either to struggle on their own or to drive or get driven.
1 minute.
Bus stops are a part of our transportation system, and they need to be considered as such. The semi-seats used in Emeryville are cheap, much cheaper than the full shelter installations. Numbers on these can be hard to find, but by my estimation, it would be less than $2.5 million, which is already less than the $3 million committed to bus stop improvements over the next 4 years. Although I would like to speed things up if we can. To wrap up, I'd like to mention a part of the interaction between myself and the GRT. When I asked about the benches, the GRT gave me the information I mentioned earlier, and as well, they mentioned that we have a program to upgrade stops and add new amenities every year. This year, we added 14 new shelters and 3 new benches. 17 down, 1,783 to go.
Thanks, Brooklyn.
Thank you for your time, everyone. If you have any questions, please, I'll try my best to answer them.
Thank you, Brooklyn, for your time tonight.
Thank you.
We'd now call on Lynn Charlton of Kitchener. Lynn is here in person. You've got 5 minutes to speak. Lynn, good evening, and thanks for coming.
Hi. My name is Lynn, and I'm grateful to see familiar and new faces on council today. I'm grateful for all of you. I'm excited to re-engage my advocacy for a system that I hold so much passion for. I'm here as an engaged and concerned citizen, advocating for our emergency shelter and supportive housing systems and the local not-for-profit organizations that navigate the contrast between the demands we place on them and the amount of resources we provide to them. We under-resource these organizations to meet our very reasonable community expectations. I'm not sure the community fully understands that we are only providing about half of the amount of resources required to sustain emergency shelter and supportive housing programming. Our local not-for-profit organizations are responsible for generating the rest of this operating budget through donation dollars. If there was a quantifiable metric for how the community feels about tents, the opioid crisis, or the increasing numbers of those who experience homelessness in the region of Waterloo, it would be the donation dollars received by these organizations. This is not a temporary barrier that not-for-profits need to work through. This is a permanent challenge, and they need our support. One-time donations from coordinated community events are not enough to keep our system running. We need to increase our annual funding to these organizations immediately. We need to stop the ridiculous requirement that they operate with such significant levels of donation dollars. We are setting our system up for failure. We place such strict and stringent restrictions on how these dollars can be spent that our organizations are struggling to keep up with the donation dollars necessary for unionized work environments, fire code requirements, building maintenance, damage done to buildings by the people we support, and most of their technology is outdated and donated. I also don't believe the community understands that emergency shelters are not permitted to use emergency shelter dollars for any programming, leaving people with very little to focus on while waiting in shelter for years for their turn in supportive housing. When you take a population of people with unsupported mental health and disabilities, remove all of the programming, and let them remain on waiting lists for years, you are creating shelter dependence through your system, and destructive behaviors are seen in the community. Our organizations are struggling to piece together health care and equipping programming for vulnerable people. Organizations should be allowed the ability to leverage regional dollars for reasonable costs associated with running programming, maintaining infrastructure, and meeting the evolving expectations. We need to be more flexible in our funding agreements. One area where I continue to see inexcusable funding barriers is in flowing dollars towards emergency shelter and supportive housing staff safety. This should be embarrassing for you. Who is going to speak up for the staff? They're not here today because they're in funding agreements with you. How do you advocate for yourself when you are literally in a funding agreement with the person with whom you are supposed to advocate? Today, our local and mostly young community members are working in organizations with high unpredictable behaviors, responding to medical crisis, and navigating death. The financial barriers our system has to overcome in ensuring high-quality employee assistance plans, abuse prevention and response, emergency first aid and nonviolent crisis intervention certifications, along with appropriate PPE, is inexcusable. Additionally, the emergency shelters have been begging council for dollars to support security measures for years. Why can't those dollars be flowed towards security guards and security cameras? It makes sense.
1 minute.
What is it going to take for council to take responsibility for the link between the lack of resources and the increasing unsafe support and work environments? As time goes on, safety options and the requirements change and evolve and increase as they should. We need to resource our organizations in a way that better protects the health and safety of our community members who work within them and also positively impacts the quality of supports provided. Councillors, I encourage you to understand that you are not the expert on how to solve these issues we see in our community. Our system needs resources, not new ideas. Our system has been bringing you and your staff new and innovative ideas, projects, programs, policies, and systems. It's time to resource our not-for-profit experts to do their work well and to watch it reflect positively within our community and on the bottom line. Not-for-profit does not mean for loss. What responsibility does the region take in operating not-for-profit organizations on budgets that do not support meeting community expectations? The greater the operating budget, the greater the capacity to serve. When we begin to fund our emergency shelter and supportive housing providers more proactively, rather than reacting with pockets of dollars to community challenges in the media, you will see the positive impacts on the budget. You will see low barrier access to healthcare, programming for life skills, and more people accessing and sustaining successful housing.
Thanks, Lynn.
There is always a positive business case for doing the right thing. I will end by saying, would you be able to do your job as well on half of the amount of resources you experience today? How efficient would you be with a 5-year-old computer and an office with a broken window? Would you be able to fill the gap on a 50% deficit budget with donation dollars? Would you be willing to make up the difference with your own earnings, as many shelter staff do today?
Thanks, Lynn. We've run over
Okay, my final word is that I would like to see a supportive partnership between the region and our local organizations who perform some of our most important work. We must resource our not-for-profit organizations to meet the expectation or pull back on the expectations. This is basic business. Thank you.
So, Ms. Charlton, thank you very much for your very impassioned presentation. Do you work in the industry? I'm just curious what your background is. Are you involved in the not-for-profit?
I have been highly involved in many of the emergency shelter systems that you experience today.
Okay. Thank you very much for your input tonight.
Thank you, Lynn. I'd like to call now on Yazin Mohammed, who is joining us virtually. Yazin, you have 5 minutes to speak.
Yes, thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me. Okay.
Yep,
I'm going to, start my video. I'll start the video. Sorry, I just got a message here. Okay, I just want to make a couple of points. I know I've got limited time. I live in Waterloo, and in the building where I'm living, I had break and entry 3 times. And I had approached the police at the very first one because it was very devastating, mentally impacting, and I don't want to go on too many more details here. Filed a report as I was supposed to do and went through all the hoops and steps. And then there were 2 subsequent times that happened after that. And as we speak right now, nothing has come through that would give me, a taxpayer, any satisfaction that something is happening. So, I come from a finance background, amongst other things that I do, and I don't want to go into the details, but I believe in value for money, okay? If there is a certain amount of budget that is being expended for protection, I want to see value for money. It's devastating to be finding yourself in a situation where these kind of a thing is happening, and then it just falls on deaf ears. So that's one thing. The other thing, I've got many issues, but I'll just summarize it. The other thing that I'm sort of very much aware of and would like to present to this council chambers today for the region is that there's an increased amount of cyber crime that's going on. And this is the kind of white collar criminality, as we call it. It's nothing to do with coming and breaking. It's insidious, it's behind the scenes. I don't know how much protection we are, doing in that respect. There's a lot to be discussed, a lot of things to be, to be uncovered, especially for people who are vulnerable. And the perpetrators do find the vulnerability somehow. I don't know how they find it, but they do find it, okay? So I'm just making a pitch that we should please look at this. I know I did speak about, the issue with the city about cybercrime, and I was told that, we have our own thing that's being done, but there's no participation from any members of the public. I'm not sure how it is with the region, but I just wanted to bring it out over here. I'm focusing on those 2 areas. Both of them are related to crime, and again, both of them are related to peace of mind, safety, which is very important, and also value for money, for the money that we are expending. Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, I can answer it.
Thank you, Yazin. Seeing none, I will call on Jeff Wilmer, who is from a Better Tent City. He'll be joining us virtually. Jeff, good evening. You've got 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, and good evening, committee members. My name is Jeff Wilmer, and I am a board member with A Better Tent City of Waterloo Region. A Better Tent City is a community initiative that provides tiny homes and shared facilities for people who were previously homeless and unsheltered. We're located at 49 Ardelt Avenue in Kitchener, and we're extremely grateful to the Waterloo Region District School Board and the City of Kitchener for providing the land that we now occupy. We're also grateful to the region for providing one-time capital grant of $150,000 this time last year to cover the cost of temporary and permanent electrical service when we moved to that site. The community now has 50 residents living in 42 cabins, and we've been up and running for almost 3 years. The concept of a better tent city has proven effective, and we provide stability, dignity, and hope to the residents, and we enable them to form a community of support for each other. Some members of Regional Council have come to see for themselves, and all others are certainly most welcome to visit, and we would be pleased to show you around. For our first 2 years, we relied very heavily on volunteer resources. Recently, we came to realize that this was no longer sustainable. We've now expanded our staff complement from the single staff person that we had for those first 2 years to 3 full-time people, and there is a need for a 4th person. Our primary sources of revenue are the monthly shelter allowance payments that each resident contributes and an ongoing grant from the United Way. But there's now a $15,000 a month gap between our operating expenses, which are about $40,000 a month, and our revenue of about $25,000 a month. We are able to sustain this for a while because we can draw on the reserve that we developed in case, the reserve we have in case we need to move to a new site. But that reserve will not last too much longer, and therefore we're requesting funding from the region in the amount of $180,000 for this coming year to fill that gap. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Deutschman.
Thank you, Chair Harris. I guess it's less of a question, and I can deal with it after, with respect to how this, and I'd probably want to ask the CAO, Mr. Lochner, how we can review this. Would it require a motion of council that this matter be brought forward into this budget deliberation or direction to council? I know several of us have been out to visit, and many of us comment on how proud we are of what they have been able to create, from Ron Doyle and Nadine and Jeff. And Doug Craig and I were out there not too long ago, and there was a mention that there was this funding. I thought actually it was a proposal that had been submitted, so I was surprised to receive information today that it had not been part of the budget deliberations. So I'll be looking for some guidance on this after the other councillors ask their questions.
Sure. Councillor Erb. We'll provide that direction perhaps at the end of the round of questions. I know Mr. Dyer would like to comment on that unless you want to do that now, but go ahead, Mr. Erb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Jeff, for your presentation and for the work that you're doing. You said the funding request was for this year, which is, I'm assuming, 23. Is the expectation it would be beyond that? Or are we just talking about 1 year here, one-time funding?
Thank you for the question. No, I think the expectation would be annual. We're really looking at 1 year at a time. Essentially, we are such a fledgling organization. We tend to think in the short term, and our lease with the city and the school board is a year-to-year lease.
Coming to an end in
the end of October this year, but we do have verbal indications that we can be reasonably confident of a 1 year extension.
Thank you.
Councillor Verbanovic.
Hi, Jeff. Great to see you, virtually at least. And thanks for all of your leadership and all you've been doing with this. I'm just wondering, have you had any dialogue with staff yet around this funding deficit and the possibility of funding it?
We have, yes. So those conversations started in likely September, October, and we made a draft written request in October. We updated that in December, and that's the request, the written request that has been sent on to regional council that I sent through the clerk yesterday. The response from housing staff was that there really wasn't room in the 22-23 budget, and that I can't remember exactly what the response was, but that if we wanted this to be considered in the 23-24, it was really up to us to speak to regional council.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Craig.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I do appreciate it, and quite enjoyed my visit out there. Very quickly, you talk about a one-year extension. What's the future of a better tent city? What do you see down the road? As opposed to year by year sort of grabbing onto things.
Yeah. Well, the site we're on now works very well for us. And I've looked for prospective sites all over this region, and I really don't foresee a better one than the one we're on right now. So our preference would be to stay there in the medium term. Long term, I would, and this is maybe being quite optimistic, but I would like to see everybody in support of housing. I don't think we should need a solution tent city in the long term, but it might take us a while to get there. And in the interim, I think that the model that we have is working quite well.
If I may, just to follow up, Mr. Chair, through you, I find it very interesting if you look at American cities, some of them, San Francisco and I think Portland, have, quote, a better tent city concept. And I think it's great because I think a lot of these ideas that are happening are a result of what you've done, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Councillor Huanick.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Jeff. Can you speak to us about funding sources that you've explored already or that you're waiting to hear from in addition to the region?
Yeah, very good question. Thank you. We do have quite a few people and businesses in the community who have supported us to get established, to get started. Much of that support really related to the capital costs of setting up the dwellings and the kitchen and the washrooms and showers and laundry. As you can appreciate, it's more difficult to persuade donors in the community to make financial donations for operating costs. We're not giving up on that necessarily, but we felt that we would start with regional council and see where that leads us.
Thank you very
much. I think also that you would have good insights as to what the costs of the Victoria Weber encampment are and what the operating costs of the Herbs Road managed community would be. And I think you'll find that the Better Tent City is a relative bargain in comparison.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't see any further questions. Oh, Councillor Foxton.
Sorry. I know this is supposed to be only questions to the speakers, but I was going to ask Mr. Dyer what $180,000 in percentage of a tax increase would it be? Would it be 0.03?
1%. Yeah, I think Mr. Dyer will want to respond a bit on the process with regards to this particular presentation and the follow-up question from Councillor Deutschmann. So perhaps we'll, allow Mr. Dyer to speak to kind of next steps on any matters that come forward, frankly.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure I want to do that math in my head at this time of day, but I'll certainly get you the number. It would be very small on the basis that $6 million is about 1%. So I think from a process perspective, what I would suggest or even recommend is it's our intention to bring forward information on grants to organizations to the Budget Committee meeting on February the 8th. So that might be an appropriate time for Budget Committee to consider the request. Alternatively, we could bring something forward to Standing Committee on February 7th, and if committee is agreeable to either of those, we'll work that out as staff over the next few days.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Dyer. Councillor James.
Yes, thank you, through you, Chair Harris, and thanks, Jeff, for coming and making the ask to council. I do have a question in terms of operating costs. How many staff do you currently have? Is there, and what is the need that you see at a Better Tent City?
Yeah, thank you for the question. That we have 3 full-time and 1 part-time staff, and the need would be for an outreach worker. We really need a person who can connect with each of the residents, dig deeper as to find out what their story is, what their hopes and aspirations are, and what their other sources of support are, whether that's family or other loved ones, so that we can be more intentional about connecting them with available supports and developing a plan to move forward to improve their lives.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Councillor Craig, did you have a follow-up?
Yes, just very quickly, through you to Mr. Whitmer. One of the things I heard when I was out there is the fact that a number of the residents haven't moved up and out, only had 1 or 2 at the most, and that they see that a Better Tent City as a community and they don't want to leave it. So, how do you answer that in terms of trying to improve things in the future for these individuals?
Yeah, it's an interesting situation that we've found. Now, I think the reason that so few have moved on is in part because there are so few opportunities to move. Certainly, when the Y built the apartment for single women at Blockland and Strasbourg, 2 of the women that lived at a Better Tent City were accepted into that program and did move to that facility. But you're right that many of the residents, while they perhaps aspire to have a place of their own, I think they also appreciate that the community of support, the friendship, and the community feeling that they have with each other, with the volunteers, and with the staff is something that is a real benefit to living in community at a Better Tent City, that they would perhaps lose that if they were living, they feel, in isolation in an apartment.
Councillor Deutschman, there's a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. Just a different follow-up, but I just wanted to comment on the transition comment, the question and the answer too. And we're finding that the more we speak to people out in the field, whether it's at Show, One Roof, or Better Tent City, because there is that lack of opportunity to move on, the term transition is a very vague adjective when you add to this, because they have no place else to go. And I think it's so crucial that we do what we can to support the original Better Tent City because of the work they do for the 50 plus people that are there. And someone like Nadine Green gets paid for an 8-hour shift, but she's there 24/7. You know, we can give lots of money to different groups, but if we can't get volunteers, it's a hard thing. And sometimes we're gonna have to pay to hire people to do some of the work that needs to be done because volunteers get burnt out. And I just wanna say, in terms of budget, this seems to be the ideal situation for accessing the tax stabilization fund to provide the funding that they're asking for with respect to this. So as we move forward, that's going to be one of the suggestions that I'll be making for council to consider with respect to this. Thank you.
Councillor Schatz, and we'll move on.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is the right place to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What kind of supports are you receiving for the residents of a Better Tent City now, like social supports?
Yeah, there's quite a number of them. Certainly, Sanguine pays visits to the site week on a schedule. So every Monday afternoon and every Thursday afternoon, the Sanguine mobile health bus is there to provide physical health support, mental health care, and addiction support. We have outreach workers from SOS, the street outreach support system, and community justice initiatives funded by a local grant from the Community Foundation, provides facilitation and counseling services as well. So that there's quite a number of services that already exist in the community that I think are more efficiently delivered because we have 50 residents in one place. You know where you can find them, and we now have an indoor space, the kitchen, dining, and living area, where people can get together and have those conversations.
So if I could just follow up to that.
Okay.
So how would this position that you're looking for, this outreach worker, work in conjunction with these other supports?
I think it's by having the time to really get to know the residents, who they are, where they've come from, what other resources they might have, and what the opportunities are for them to move to a new phase of their life. Nadine Green, as our site coordinator, really doesn't have the capacity to do that because she's really working the night shift up all night, making sure that she monitors the kitchen and dining area and the visitors that are there, and just sort of keeping things calm. And so there's not a lot of capacity to get to know people or to help them in daytime by making phone calls or taking them to appointments and those kind of things. That if we had a dedicated outreach worker, I think there's a lot of work that really can only be done on 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and that's just Nadine doesn't have the capacity to do that because she's working nights.
Thank you.
Councillor Huenick.
I think it's worth, through you, Chair, I think it's worth recognizing that for some, a better tent city may be a form of supportive housing. So perhaps speaking of moving on or moving out is not necessarily the way to go. But I'm confused a little bit because at the beginning of your presentation, you noted that you were $15,000 short every month just on your current operating costs. But you're also considering hiring another person. So can you explain that a little bit?
Certainly, yes. Thanks. I wasn't clear enough on that. So the 15,000 is the gap between the monthly revenue we know we can expect and the budget for this year. So it presumes the hiring of that fourth full-time person. If we were to look at the gap between our current revenue and our current staffing funding, it would be probably in the more like 11,000, 10 to 11,000 a month rather than 15.
Thank you, Mr. Wilmer. I will now call on Allison Jackson, who's here with us this evening. Allison, because of your late registration, I believe you've got 3 minutes to address council. Allison, welcome to the meeting.
Mr. Chairman, regional councillors, my name is Alison Jackson. I live at 74 Esther Avenue in Cambridge, and I'm here tonight to object to the closing of Doon Heritage Village at the Ken Sealing Waterloo Region Museum for the next 2 years in order to upgrade the utilities infrastructure at the village. Now, I understand that upgrades in utilities may be required, but to close the entire village for 2 seasons is totally unnecessary. What business closes down for 2 years in order to upgrade their electricity or water? With today's technology, this type of work can be done with minimum interruptions to the site and often in the off-season. To me, this closure is an excuse for possibly saving money on staffing and other operational expenses. I've been a volunteer at the museum and the village for almost 45 years. I was instrumental in the discussions which saw the region take over the site in 1983, 40 years ago, promising to upgrade and operate the facility. True to their word, the region has kept that promise, and we now have a facility that is now the envy of many communities and a wonderful tourist attraction. Along comes COVID, and the site is closed for over 2 years and now only gradually opening with reduced hours. If the Heritage Village is closed for another 2 years, then it will be almost 5 years of continuous closure. Doon Heritage Village is a perfect place to keep open after pandemic closure. Over the last 10 to 20 years, There has been a steady and continuous growth in the number of visitors and school children, and we cannot lose that momentum. We cannot lose the trust of teachers who have used this facility for years as part of the Ontario curriculum. To close for 2 years would deprive our future citizens, young families, newcomers to Canada, of the knowledge of our local history, the role of agriculture in our society, and a better understanding of our history. Many children have never seen a pig or a sheep. The village is not just a museum. It's a little corner of peace and tranquility and a slower pace in this turbulent world, which is what we need. Doon Heritage Village is a destination tourist attraction, and our Premier is now promoting tourism in a way to open up our economy and our province to the world again. We are passing up a golden opportunity to be part of that and offer a service and experience which helps us recover. This is a bad decision, in my opinion, by senior staff to try and solve their budget and bad staffing decisions. There have been 3 managers at that site in the last 5-6 years. How much of a decline in revenue will there be from school groups and visitors with 5 years of closure? That's a big budget decision. We have not only built a reputation of having a world-class facility in our museum, but also the memories and great experiences the visitors have, both young and small, of visiting the village, and it's with them for a lifetime. I hear it from visitors every time I volunteer there. If you agree with this closure, in my opinion, this is the beginning of destruction by neglect, because the excellent work and decisions made by former staff and councils will have been in vain. Please don't close Doon Heritage Village for the next 2 years. There's always another way to do it.
Thank you, Alison. We have a question from Councillor Hurnet.
Alison, I just want to say thank you for coming today. And as a person with accessibility needs, I also want to highlight the benefit of providing your entire presentation in both verbal and written form. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you.
I would like to now open the floor and call upon any members of the public who wish to speak at today's public input meeting. They can come forward. I believe we do have an individual. Yep. Come on forward, state your name, and you'll have 3 minutes to delegate. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Zapin. I've come here to... Hello, my name is Zavin. I've come here to discuss the difference in property tax between multi-residential buildings and single-family homes. The property tax rate for multi-residential buildings is almost twice that of single-family homes. And if you were to ask who you believe lives in apartment buildings, you would probably say lower-income individuals, people who are more likely to use public transit, and people who are more likely to support small businesses. And by doing this, what we're essentially doing is taxing the poor to subsidize the rich. And I believe that by doing this, we're also contributing to increased rent costs and a housing crisis. So I am here today to ask the council to propose a 10-year plan to slowly reduce the tax rate of multi-residential buildings from 2% to 1.1%, which is the same as single-family residential buildings. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I want to remind Council that, and the public for that matter, that all correspondence received by the Regional Clerk's Office regarding the strategic plan and budget have been compiled and included on this addendum agenda for Council's consideration. Any additional correspondence received after the addendum agenda was sent up until 4:30 p.m. Yesterday evening was sent to Council via email and will be included in the minutes of this meeting. Any correspondence received after this meeting will be sent to Council and included in the February 8th Strategic Planning and Budget Public Input Meeting agenda. I also want to thank all of the residents that have emailed Council directly with their perspectives on today's agenda. As always, there are several ways to share your views with Council, including delegating, emailing, or visiting the Engage Waterloo Region website. I'll now move to item 7. There were no communications. Is there any other business? We will now start a vote to adjourn the strategic planning and budget meeting. Is there a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Wolf, seconded by Councillor Deutschmann. Please vote. And that is carried. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.